Hey Lou, it's great to have you back here on the show. How have you been?
Vinny, it's great to be here, and a big hello to you and your great audience. It's been, it's like that old novel. We laughed, we cried. It's been one hell of a roller coaster, but here we are, right? Here we are, and a lot of things happening, a lot of new updates for you and your again your audience. A lot of things are going on behind the scenes, and slowly but surely, we're making progress together, all of us. As you know, Vinny, there's no rules. You ask me whatever the heck you want to ask me, and if I can answer it, I will. And if I can't, I won't, and I'll tell you why.
So we've been hearing this term, the program, being bandied about a lot recently, especially since David Grush came forward. But there has been rumors and talk of there being more than one legacy program. Is there any validity to that? And if so, what would the differences be between them?
Yeah. So, I mean, the U.S. government has had a long history of UAP programs. People know about Blue Book and ATIP, but they forget about the UAP Task Force and AOIMSG, and now there's Arrow, and before that there were other programs. That is correct, and it is even possible that some of these were running simultaneously because we even in ATIP started bumping up against legacy, if you will, issues where there were these pockets of information that existed on UAP within the various agencies. It was like this weird lattice work. Think of a cobweb, but rather than have a nice orderly cobweb, it was kind of like a cobweb that was made in space. It's just kind of these random filaments, and we would bump up against them once in a while. And in some cases, they wanted to work with us. In other cases, they absolutely did not want to work with us.
So these programs, these crash retrieval reverse engineering programs, would they fall under the Purple Nova moniker?
Yeah, correct. So we referred to them as Purple Nova. It was kind of a term used to describe beyond black projects, and that's what they were. That's what we referred to them as.
Now, in the book, you name the kind of usual suspects when it comes to the aerospace companies, Lockheed Martin, etc. But one name that you did raise that surprised me, and I think a few other people, was Monsanto. So, what was it that they were involved in? What did you discover?
Yeah, allegedly Monsanto historically had some part in the biologics aspect, and also perhaps even in the squelching of people having conversations about the topic, intimidation and whatnot. It is a multinational corporation, and it was suggested several times. Well, more than suggested, but I'll say suggested that they had a historical part of this effort, looking specifically at potentially the biologics aspect of it.
And with Monsanto being a global company, is there a chance that some of this material could have left the United States and been sent overseas?
Sure, sure. I mean, look, it happens all the time, right? I mean, we have things in place to try to prevent that from ever happening, but it's happened before, and I'm sure it will happen again.
And with the aerospace companies and the hardware that they'd acquired, again, would that have gone overseas at all? Potentially?
Uh, you know, it, it's tough to say. The U.S. government's pretty good at locking things down if they want to. Usually when it comes to actual material science, it's a little more difficult because you actually can lock this stuff away in a safe, right? Whereas biological samples may be cut into a million pieces, a million slices, put into a petri dish. It's not exactly the same.
So when these objects, this material is acquired, would there be like a central kind of facility or storage facility where this gets sent to, kind of before it gets distributed out to the various, I don't know, contractors or military branches or other people like that?
Yeah. So typically, what you do is you take it to your nearest military installation where you can lock it down, because a military installation isn't like state and local tribal authorities, where because you're near, let's say, a indigenous Native American reservation, so they have a tribal land authorities, or you're not next to a city where you have to worry about local cops and sheriffs. You bring it to a military installation, which is federal property. It's a federal installation, so thereby you are dealing with federal rules, and from the DoD perspective, they own the land, right? They are judge, jury, and executioner. They can do whatever they want on that military installation because it is federal land. So immediately you take this type of stuff to a local installation, military installation, where then you can lock it down and then decide what you want to do with it.
And what about facilities that may be storing this stuff more long term? You know, we've heard about places such as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, who are alleged to have held on to a lot of this material for decades. Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, you want some place that's close to, if you will, a brain trust, individuals that have certain expertise in science and exploitation and engineering, material scientists as well, and you want really the best and brightest. And so, a lot of these military installations are really kind of close to research triangles, and you also want potentially national laboratories involved, right? So, there's a few places that fit the bill for that for sure.
And is the Department of Energy still part of this equation?
They are. So I will tell you, there was an individual. I don't want to say his name. He was a really good human being. He was a very senior person in the Department of Energy. He was a special agent and was also part of their Inspector General (IG). And he told me about 5 years ago, and it's a shame because he's dead now, and he allegedly died from COVID. Um, I can't say one way or another if that's true, but he was very concerned because he had uncovered. He told me he had uncovered the UAP effort out of Department of Energy. Now, I've never talked about this, so let me be careful what I how I say this. Yeah, this is not classified. So he revealed to me. He said, "Look, I'm really upset, Lou. They tried to ruin my career over this. DOE has had a long interest in the UAP issue, particularly over some of our facilities, and I'm tired of the cover up." And he said, "Look, the Department of Energy is trying to actively discredit me. I'm very upset by it." Which, by the way, maybe he felt kind of compelled to tell me because I went through a similar experience, right? And Dave Grush and anybody else who dared to step forward, and he was very concerned. His wife was a is a medical doctor, and I had a chance to speak to her after his death. Uh, it was just it was a shame. He was a really good man, and he wanted to come forward and be one of the whistleblowers. And unfortunately, he passed away in his home. His wife found him there dead, unfortunately. Now, was it COVID? Yeah, could have been. A lot of people died from it. Um, but it's interesting because there's been some recent issues where folks who are tangentially involved with this topic have had to endure some pretty interesting things lately. And so, you know, coincidence? Yeah, could be, probably. I don't want to be paranoid, but that is a true story. And maybe one day his story will be told. I'd love to be able to tell the world a little bit about this guy. He was a really good person.
So the community obviously wants to hear from and see more whistleblowers come forward. Do you think they're just biding their time due to the fear of kind of pushback and things like that?
Yeah, they want more legislation to protect him. Look, they saw what happened to Dave Grush within 24 hours of him coming out. I laid it out in the book. I tell you, here's exactly what the government's going to do if you step forward. And that's right out of their playbook. And what they do, they went right after Grush. What they do with me, same thing. In fact, I had an IG 3 hour conversation with the Inspector General at DOD, where they told me this is a private and privileged conversation. This will never see the light of day. You can trust us. So I told them what I knew. What did they do? They released the transcript, right? This was a protected and private conversation. Now, I don't really care because everything I told them was truthful and I've told everybody else the same thing. But the fact is, they were sending a very clear message to anybody else who wants to have a conversation about this topic. Hey, you can come talk to us, but we're not going to protect your stuff, even though we're supposed to. Oh, look what we just did. Oops, sorry. So, these are the way people realize that the government says one thing. Part of the government might say one thing, but they don't really mean it. They're not going to protect you. They're not going to go do what they need to do, and people realize that. So this is why we need additional legislation to protect these individuals so they can come out and have conversations with certain members of Congress who have a need to know, and they can talk to the right people in the executive branch. Because right now, they know they can't. They do not trust. They do not trust their government. That's just the bottom line.
So, in the last couple of days, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was asked about any potential hearings this month in September, and she said, yes, it's in my schedule. and you've been instrumental in kind of helping things move along up on Capitol Hill. So, are you aware of this upcoming hearing, and if so, what the focus might be?
No, I'm aware of it. I think it's going to probably be, if I had to guess, a new conversation with the new Aero director. Unfortunately, he hasn't been in the seat long enough to really be spun up on anything. So I don't know. Maybe it's just going to be more pro forma. Will you do this? Will you do that? Will you do this? Yes, 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 and yes. Because only being in the seat for a couple of weeks, that's really not enough time to give any type of comprehensive briefing on what the organization has learned over the course of several years. It's just not realistic. You got to get people time to get spun up. So I don't know. I suspect it's probably going to be something like that. Um, there's going to be some other testimony too at some point here, and not too distant future, which should be very interesting. Probably very public as well, maybe from some whistleblowers potentially, if I had to guess. Um, so that's moving down the track as well. I think Burchett had kind of indicated that. Representative Tim Burchett indicated that those conversations were ongoing, and they are planning to do something like that.
Well, let's stick with Arrow and the new director, John Kozlowski, because it's been said that he actually worked for the NSA advising the UAP task force on certain equipment.
Yeah, yeah, and he's also a known quantity to some of the folks that have been involved historically in the UAP effort. Folks like Jay and myself and a few others know of him, and in some cases know him. So I think there is some cautious optimism that he will do the right thing. Let's face it, the last iteration was a complete debacle. Not even the co-sponsor of that entire organization, which was the director of national intelligence, she wouldn't even endorse the report that they put out. I mean, it was so full of holes and inconsistencies. It was actually really embarrassing for that. It actually pained me to read it, not because it said anything that I was against. It was simply because it was done so poorly. I mean, even basic facts they couldn't get right, and it did more harm than good for Arrow. I mean, as much as it really didn't impact disclosure at all because it was so obviously poorly done. I'm hopeful that that won't be the case this time. Hopefully they're going to put some more rigor, and there's not going to be this cognitive bias that we've been seeing the last couple of years with Arrow.
We were always told there was going to be a part two to that report as well. Do you think we're still likely to see that?
Not under the former director Kirkpatrick, maybe under somebody else. Look, I would never say anything personally to disparage anybody, because Sean's probably a great guy and a great guy to have as a neighbor and crack a beer with or have a barbecue. But professionally speaking, the track record, um, it wasn't good. There were things that were said that were blatantly and patently false. Like, oh, we didn't speak to anybody that had firsthand knowledge. That's not true. They did, and I know who they were, including some folks like me. So it's really was very disappointing to see that in writing. This is the same guy who said, "Oh, I was never at a meeting in the Senate about Skinwalker Ranch," and all of a sudden there's a picture of him at the meeting in the Senate about Skinwalker Ranch. Right? I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. So, and again, I'm speaking professionally, not personally. So I want to make sure there's a line there. I'm not personally attacking him. Just like in my capacity when I was the director of National Program Special Management Staff, if I did poorly, then that's free game because you are a public servant and your track record is your track record. So I'm just speaking to my opinion based upon his professional performance, not his personal character. So I just want to make that very clear.
The one thing that Sean Kirkpatrick has said quite a few times now is that he had full access to everything, yet found no evidence of crash retrievals or extraterrestrials in any way, shape, or form.
No, I knew people that were in organizations that actually said they never came to speak to them, or they knocked on a door and said, "Do you have anything UFO related?" And they're like, "Huh?" And they walked away. So that again, that's not accurate. Now, with that said, I also know that he and his family were apparently subject to a lot of intimidation and retribution and threats, which is completely unacceptable. Let me make this perfectly clear. At no time is it ever acceptable to threaten somebody. I don't care what side of the conversation you're on. I don't care what you believe in. I don't care how much you think the other side is damaging disclosure or the opposite. There is no time that is ever, in my opinion, is it appropriate to threaten someone or their family, or to expose them, or dox them, or interfere with their privacy and their right to safety and security. That's unacceptable. Anybody who does that is not on team disclosure. We don't want you. And so I just want to make that clear as well, because he was attacked and his family was threatened. And if that's the case, then that's terrible, because I personally know what that feels like, and I would never wish that on anybody.
Well, let me expand upon that a little bit because, you know, we see a lot of that kind of negativity in the UFO community. We have people on both sides, you know, people who claim to be supporters of you who, you know, say pretty bad things, and, you know, they are attacking people and, you know, doxing in some occasions, in your name, you know, and the same comes from the other side, you know. And I don't normally go into this kind of thing, but how does that make you feel?
I appreciate vigor and I appreciate people defending me. What I don't want people to do is attacking somebody else on my behalf. That is not acceptable, and I don't agree with that. If you want to defend somebody based upon facts and data, I support that, and that's on both sides. Not just me. Even like I said with Sean Kirkpatrick or anybody else who I may not necessarily agree with. I agree with having good, productive conversations, and but as long as we have decorum, right, within the field. Part of the problem with the UAP community, they're very passionate, and it's not a problem in itself. That's a virtue. The problem becomes when that passion gets translated into either either violence or the threat of violence, or a complete loss of decorum. This only works, this conversation, because we can all talk together and we can also agree to disagree. The problem is that there's a lot of people that love drama and they seek it out, and they purposely want to stir it up, whether it's with a certain podcaster or a certain not so reputable outlet that they know loves just BS and drama and will literally make stuff up just because they want to see the result of the drama go, work its way downstream. That's not helpful. And part of the problem is too, some of it's very sophisticated. Look, I'll give you an example. Wikipedia, which is the number one search engine on Google, has been hijacked. Look, we've got the documents. There are organizations out there that are self-proclaimed skeptics. And by the way, if you ask me, a true believer and a skeptic are no different. They're just on opposite ends of the spectrum. But both of them, no matter what information you present, they will never change their narrative. So skeptics are just as bad as the true believers. The ones that they scream at saying, "Oh, you guys are a bunch of dummies." Don't look now, but so are they. And so when they go in and they hijack someone's wiki page and they put a bunch of stuff in there that say they're fake or biased or leaning, I've been called a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I actually went to school to study science and medicine, right? Unlike the editors there who don't have any type of science degree. I was a federal agent. I was a special agent in counterintelligence, where I was just looking at data and the facts, right? So for these people to say that, or let's say something like, "Oh, Lou is anti-Semitic." I was raised Jew. What are you talking about? I went to temple, for God's sakes, and have a yarmulke. These are people that say things out of context that have no idea what they're talking about, but they get the power behind the keyboard. They put something in there and they let it float. And unfortunately, the masses, the majority of people, aren't aware of it or care enough to say, "That's wrong. We need to hold you accountable. That's slander." And I'm saying this not because of just me. That's just one example. They do it to other folks like Gary Nolan and Chris Mellon. And if they do not agree with your narrative, watch out. And they're going to lock it down. And by the way, Wiki allows them to do that. And they're getting paid as a nonprofit organization to do this, right? So now not only are they doing it because they feel that it's important, but they're actually getting paid to do it. There's an influence. Someone is influencing them to do that and paying for that and supporting that, right? And when you start looking at where some of this money comes from, some of it's coming from overseas. That's a big deal. Wait a minute. Are we talking now potential foreign influence in in U.S. media and freedom of the press potentially. So, anyways, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but these are the things that the community, if they really are angry, focus their time and attention on that instead of beating each other up and instead of picking Team Lou or Team this or Team that. Look, we're all one team. We're all under the same flag. That's truth and accountability and disclosure, right? America can handle the truth. The world can handle the truth. And the world deserves the truth. Let's stick with that. Let's keep pushing forward. And rather than backbiting ourselves constantly and, well, I want more attention. No, I want more attention. No, I want more attention. Let's focus on disclosure, guys and gals. This is important to all of us. Let's not let our own egos ruin the one opportunity we have to actually get disclosure and transparency. Can we just set aside our differences for just a little bit and try to look at the real roadblocks to disclosure? That's where I think we need to apply our emphasis. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you, I hate it when people come out there and accuse me of all sorts of BS. That's, Lou's under SEC investigation. No, I'm not. Lou's being sued. No, I'm not. All these dumb things people will just invent to see how far it goes. Let's take that energy and focus it on something that's actually important and that can make a difference. That would be my recommendation.
Now, let me ask you about the alleged unreleased extra 4 minutes of the gimbal video. So many people kind of messaged me or asked questions on social media about this. Have you seen it, Lou? Has Congress seen it? What does it show exactly?
So, because I don't have approval to talk specifically about the gimbal, other than what has been actually shown, let me just say this that might help people. If that's the video you're hanging your hat on, don't do it, because there are videos that the government have that are truly in ultra HD 4K. That's as clear as a bell. People say, well, why are we only seeing the fuzzy stuff? Because that's the only videos that the government's comfortable releasing to you. That's why. It's not why we don't have the other stuff. We've got really good stuff. The problem is it's really classified. And why is that? Because maybe the location we were at, maybe the type of capability we're using, maybe the fidelity of the information that we have, right? Maybe there's a whole lot of reasons why you want to keep that safe and secure and out of the hands of your adversary. Now, are there ways to maybe strip the metadata to mask certain things? And yes, there are. And this is why you see people like Chris Mellon and myself really pushing hard to try to get the release of these videos, have them scrubbed to the point where the government's happy and comfortable with it. Say, look, there's no sources and methods here. We're not revealing anything, any type of secret capability. Now that we've got this naked video, can we put it out there for the world to see, so they can see just some of the stuff that we have? That's what we're trying to do also, and this is why it's important for Congress to be part of this conversation, because they can write law that forces it. Look, we've already crossed a mountain. We already have it by law that organizations now have to send their UAP information, their historical UAP information, to the National Archives, right? Think about that. Now there's a single repository. Instead of it being in all these different organizations and agencies, it's now one place, baby. You got one belly button. And if you've got a need to know and a security clearance, you can go there and get that information yourself, right? You just can't release it. But now there are researchers in the government and people in the aerospace corporations and people in the Department of Defense and people in national security and the intelligence community that now can actually go to the National Archives and start doing some historical analysis going all the way back to the 1950s. And so I think that's a really big achievement that I think people underestimate just how important of a step that really is, because that's been part of the problem all along. We've had these disparate efforts within different organizations, whether it's DOE or CIA or DOD or anywhere, U.S. Air Force. And it was kind of like pre 9/11 days, right? You had all these pockets of information, but nobody was sharing that information. And what happened? Well, 9/11 happened, right? 9/11 happened because we weren't sharing information good enough inside our own government. So this is now kind of the same thing where historically the UAP effort has been managed the same way. Now we're at a point where all that's going to be, if you will, coalescing in one central facility, right? And that's monumental. I mean, that's half the battle right there, to be honest with you, in my opinion.
I think the worry with that, though, is how is it policed? Where's the oversight? What is stopping someone like the Air Force just saying, nothing to see here? The same old story, really.
So now you need a stick, right? You have a carrot to incentivize, which is usually money and budget, and now you have to have a stick, and that stick is okay. If you don't do this, you're fired. How about that? If you don't do this, we'll hold you criminally liable. How about that? So either that or you need to resign, and you need to resign like now. Otherwise, we're gonna, you better do your job you're supposed to do, or we're gonna find someone who can.
Now, Lou, you've done, quite a few podcasts in the last few weeks since the book Imminent was released, which have been great. But in one of them, you asked about intent. And I think your reply was that hasn't come out yet. Now, does that imply that there is some knowledge about the intent? And if so, are we likely to kind of hear about that at some point in the future?
Yeah, great question, Vinny. There's a lot of options. There are some people who feel very strongly that we already know their intent. I personally am not convinced of that. It doesn't mean I'm right. I could be wrong, right? I mean, I've only got involved in this program really since 2009-ish time frame. There's a whole history going back decades. Is it possible that other organizations have better insight, more insight than we did? Absolutely. I sure hope that's the case. Actually, I hope that's what the case is. I can't guarantee it. I don't know, and I personally didn't come across it other than the anecdotes that hey, there've been actually agreements and this and that. Well, that sounds great, but until I see the document in front of me myself and I can hold it and touch it and smell it and read it, I can't comment on that because I simply don't know. Right? I want to make sure that I'm always very careful on the things that I do know is because of it's firsthand, and then the things that I'll speculate based upon that firsthand information. And then there's areas that I simply have no clue, and this is one of those areas. I do not know the intent. I have not had a convincing argument yet from anybody inside the government that leads me to believe that we know for sure what their intent is. Look, we don't even know the intent of our own fellow man, right? And men and women out there. How many people get catfished? I've gone on a date with someone. Oh, I love them. I was just watching a show with my wife the other day on Lacey Peterson, and everybody thought this guy was a great guy until it turned out he wasn't a great guy, right? So you have to be careful with intent with human beings because a lot of times, we don't know someone's intent, and that's problematic. And so now you want to try to superimpose that, as difficult it is with humans, and now do that with NHI. On what basis are you able to confidently predict their intent? Is it because you heard something, you saw something? Because please tell me, because I sure would love to know. I'm not convinced we have a full comprehensive understanding of intent.
Yeah, I think we sometimes too often anthropomorphize these beings and kind of put our thoughts and feelings and values onto them. One thing that always kind of rubs me the wrong way to a degree is when people say if they were a threat, they would have destroyed us by now or done something by now. Whereas to me, how do we know that they even perceive time as we do? How do we know they're not just biding their time? Do you know what I mean? This is kind of how I think about these things. It's not one or the other. But we just don't know. So we have to look at every possibility.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Correct. I mean, our time scale is the last 60 years. Well, that could be a day and a half. It's relative, right? Depending. We know that some of our adversaries have 20, 30-year strategic plans. We don't. In our country, we pretty much have 4-year strategic plans because we have a new president or a new administration every 4, if not every 4, certainly every 8 years, and priorities change. But there are countries out there that have 20, 30, 40-year strategic plans because they have continuity and they can do it, and they do it. So it's something to recognize that just because we haven't seen any clear sign of intent or what they want to do doesn't mean that there isn't any. Doesn't mean that they don't have a plan and that are executing that plan.
And I think nobody genuinely knows the actual intent, whether they're good, bad. So I always imagine that with good comes bad. Light and dark, yin and yang. I mean, is that a reasonable way to look at it?
Yeah, I even go more simple than that. There's love and there's fear, and mostly most things that are done for good are done out of love, and those things that are done bad are usually somehow, when you get down to the very end, it's related to fear somehow. I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to expand upon that. We talk about good and bad, yin and yang, opposites, light and dark. I think from an emotional perspective, I think the two motivations are love and fear. Out of fear, a lot of bad things are done, and out of love, a lot of good things are done. Hopefully, we as Lincoln likes to say, right, listen to our better angels, if we're smart.
And a lot of these interactions with a non-human intelligence have actually come from experiencers and in some cases abductees. And the focus in the focus in the UFO subject for the past few years has been heavily focused on the government side of things. So, is there a way that we can bring the experiences and the people that have had these interactions with this intelligence back into the conversation and into the forefront? Let them have their say and not feel like they're just taking a back seat.
Yeah, we need to, but everything has to be done in sequence, right? A lot of people are just now coming to terms with the notion and the idea about UAP. Um, you know, you don't you don't eat a 7-course meal all in one bite. What happens? You choke, right? And then you don't get to eat any of it. So we need to do things incrementally. Now we have already started discussing the biological effects of UAP on human beings and on military personnel and intelligence officials. We've actually now started seeing where individuals are on full medical compensation, 100% disability by the U.S. government because of involvement with a UAP encounter. So it's happening, right? But it's got to be a little more gradual. I know people are chomping at the bit and say, "Well, I want to be represented." You are being represented, I promise you. But we have to do this gradually, right? It's like a conversation. Look, I don't want to be crude, but let me kind of give you an example as a father to deal with this, right? There comes a time when you have kids and you got to talk to them about sex, right? It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, but if you don't, they're gonna learn it from the internet, right, or their friends, which is the last thing you want to do. So it's like having a conversation like that with you know with your kid. You have to be sensitive. You've got to be careful on how you have that conversation, and hopefully, it's a healthy, productive conversation. Same thing with this topic. This is a lot for people to swallow, man. This is a lot. And by the way, there's still people that will say, "Look, if you're an experiencer, that's not a good thing, right?" Because from a law enforcement perspective, one could look and say, "Okay, well, let's see. Someone take you away against your will, that's kidnapping. Somebody's touching you without your permission, oh, that's a felony offense. That's called assault, right?" So we can start racking up the charges here. I think if my daughter was taken somewhere against her will, I wouldn't be very happy about that, right? So this is part of that conversation that will necessarily lead to and then you've got people that are having trouble themselves dealing with this. Look, I being in combat myself and seeing the ravages of war, that's hard for people to process, right? There's a PTSD aspect to a lot of those experiences, and people who claim to have been abducted or had some sort of up close personal contact with UAP, some of those folks are psychologically traumatized, right? And so this isn't a topic where we go out and we just make fun of people and say, "Oh, you've been probed, dude," and ha ha ha, and tinfoil hat. You know, that's probably not the best way to approach folks like that. And that's what's been happening for the last 70 years. So on top of talking about the topic, we have to recalibrate in how we have the conversation. Because if there is validity to it, then we've got a whole bunch of other issues we're going to have to deal with. It's not just nuts and bolts UAP. Now we're talking about, hey, look, in some cases, you start kidnapping people, that's an act of war. I mean, literally. So let's be careful how we approach this conversation, right? We need to be very, very careful. It needs to be all based in scientific evidence. We need to make sure that there's protections for people who feel that they may have had an encounter or have been abducted, right? Again, the term abduction, I think, is relative because some people say, "Well, I wasn't abducted. I went because I went my own free will." Okay, well, then maybe that's not an abduction. But somebody who's laying in bed who claims that someone came in and grabbed them and snatched and grabbed, put them on a table, and starts touching them, that's an abduction. That's legally in legal terms. So we need to approach this topic, you know, carefully and I think responsibly.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Now, one thing that I found really interesting in the book was a bit where you talked about people with remote viewing abilities, people that had UAP encounters and biological effects had actually been tested and found that they had Native American DNA. So, could you expand upon that a bit for us, please?
Yeah, some research was done by trained medical practitioners and geneticists and microbiologists who found this commonality, that a lot of individuals who are prone to remote viewing um, seem to have a large amount of indigenous American blood in them. Now, uh, if you talk to indigenous peoples, like where I live near the Crow Nation and other peoples, this topic is matter of fact for them. This isn't, we like to look at things as paranormal. To them, this is parafact. This is part of the way they were raised, and they have an interaction with UAP going back thousands of years in some cases, Aboriginal people. So um, only we have this stigma associated with it. And is it possible that, for example, remote viewing, which I believe personally is based in something in quantum physics? I don't think it's mumbo jumbo. I think it's actually very common. I think most people can actually do it and not even realize it. I suspect it's probably something vestigial, meaning it's nothing new. It's old, probably like our appendix that we relied upon in order to survive in nature and ascertain before we had the ability to communicate on a global scale on relatively almost now a global language, right? Because AI can translate for you instantaneously. We had to rely on other skills to survive to make sure that whoever I'm talking to over there doesn't kill me, doesn't take my food, doesn't hurt my family. And so it's possible that remote viewing is really just some ancient, call it a sixth sense, but really it's probably just nonverbal communication that today animals even today can still use, like dogs when they walk into a room and they see each other. A lot of times I explain to people, like, what's it like to remote view? I'm like, well, you ever been in a hotel and say, you know what, I feel like calling my friend out of the blue, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I was just thinking of you, right? um, Perfect example of what remote viewing might be part of, right? Is this a lot of scientists now are speculating that human consciousness, what makes me me and you, is really a quantum process occurring in our brains. And if that's the case, we know in the quantum world, um, time and space can get a little fuzzy, right? As Einstein said, spooky action at a distance. Things start to happen at the very small scales of reality that don't make sense and shouldn't happen, but they do. And in fact, that seems to be the rule book, and that there's this range of probability versus an exact spot, an exact location in space time. It breaks down, and maybe that's where remote viewing, is that's really the core of where remote viewing comes from. May not be uncommon at all.
So, are you aware if the government still has an active remote viewing program?
I can't talk about that, unfortunately. I'm not allowed to discuss what the government may or may not be doing right now regarding. I can tell you that Stargate was shut down, and before that, it was Grill Flame and a few others. But what the government may be doing now, I'm not at liberty to discuss.
Now, recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, you revealed this incident involving a very large object passing an oil derrick. And in the past, you've also talked about the now infamous 23-minute video. So I guess my question would be, are you able, without revealing sources and methods, to tell us about any other very compelling incidents or cases that have been captured?
Uh, I mean, I don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many. We had one where this object came within 20 feet, 30 feet of the aircraft. The pilot nearly, uh, let's just say he was very nervous. He Two expletives, and but again, there's so many of these videos. There's stuff that's not even video related. There's other intelligence capabilities I can't talk about, but give you even a more compelling picture of the performance characteristics of some of these things. Like, to the point you're like, this can't be real. This can't be happening. And yet there's the data, right? It's like, there it is for all to see.
Let me ask you this then. Has the Tic Tac been seen again since 2004?
Uh, I would say best way to answer that would be a undeniable yes.
And that would be whites doing the same kind of things, the same kind of maneuvers seen over water?
Over water. And there's some other ones. We're starting to see the cylinders coming back now. Uh, so it's really weird because there seems to be like a cycle to some degree of for one decade people spot tic tacs, and then a decade later it's more lenticular saucer shape, and then the next day it's back to the tic tacs, right? So it's really interesting. We don't quite yet know what that means. We don't know if it's an inherent function of, again, their intent, right, or is it the fact that we just happen to be looking for certain morphology of craft more often, and so we're seeing those. Don't know yet. I think the jury's still out on that.
Wow. Do you think these videos will ever come out, this information?
I sure hope so. This is why the book, I put some of those incidents there because I got it cleared by the Pentagon. This is the first time I was even ever allowed to talk about some of these videos. I've mentioned them before, but I've always walked that fine line where if I said too much, I could find myself in a lot of trouble. Now that it's out there in the wild and I've been approved to talk about it, then I can talk about those incidents. I'm not allowed to talk about other ones that I haven't yet received approval to talk about, unfortunately.
What about information, documents wise? Are you aware of any kind of documents that are out there already in the public domain that are often heavily overlooked and people should really kind of be focusing on now to kind of learn more about what's going on?
I mean, sure. Look, I'll tell you. I know it's controversial to say, but there's an individual out there who has a fantastic site. We don't always agree, but he has done an incredible job with Freedom of Information Act. And his name is John Greenwald. He owns the Black Vault. He is a curator of the Black Vault, which is probably the most comprehensive repository of all released UFO information by the U.S. government. That's a big deal because there are some real gems in there that you can, if you know what you're looking for, paint a really compelling picture of what we're dealing with. It's a proverbial gold mine. And so I would encourage anybody, if you're interested to know what documents have been officially released. People say, well, this is just a report. No, look where that report's coming from. Look at the system, right? This is not just report. This is an IIR, an intelligence information report that was put into an intelligence database by an intelligence officer conducting an intelligence investigation, right? That's where you can start looking at this stuff and saying, oh, I see. This is not just some rando, as my daughter likes to call him, that's putting up information. No, this is now, and by the way, the source of this information may have been, oh, I don't know, an intercept of a foreign country's communications, right? So it's not even our own people reporting it; it's another country, and we just happen to, maybe hear about it. So this is really really compelling stuff, and John has done an incredible job and service, frankly, for everybody creating that website. It's really amazing. I would tell everybody, for anything, support that because it's really a great resource. He's done a tremendous job with that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely second that. The Black Vault has been such a valuable resource for me personally in the many years before I was doing the podcast and everything. When I was researching, it was almost my go-to for starting off looking into individual cases and that. So yeah, definitely agree. It's vital. Now, Lou, obviously, I've been inundated with questions from the community. I put out posts all across social media asking for people to submit some. So, if it's okay with you, we'll get to a few of those now. I'd like to start with a question from Nick Gold on X. And Nick asks, is Lou aware of the existence of any intelligence assessments generated within DoD IC agencies relating to the possibilities for the nature and origin of highly anomalous, apparently technological UAP?
Wow. Let me do a polite pass on that. Great question. I'd have to talk to some people first before I can answer that one way or the other. Great question. Give me okay. No, just give me a little time. Let me see if I can get approval from somebody to talk about that.
Next, we have a question from another Nick on X, and he says, "What is Lou's most recent experience with the phenomena and/or high strangeness, and when did it occur?"
Well, I don't know if I would call it high strangeness because at the end of the day, it could be completely coincidental. I just want to make sure that, like, for example, with the green orbs that we saw at our house, those were real, whatever they were. Now, were they UAP related? Maybe not. Is it possible that they were ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire or faulty wiring in the house, and now the air is being ionized and there's a plasma ball? Sure, all that's possible. But here's what we do know: that it was witnessed not only by myself and my wife and my kids and even our neighbors, but it was also occurring as I got involved into the ATIP program. And when I left the ATIP program, it subsided. And it was also experienced simultaneously with other individuals that were associated with ATIP and OSAP. So I can't speak for them. I think those stories will be coming out at some point. But it was real. The problem is I can't definitively tie it to the UAP phenomenon. I can't. And so I won't, right? It's easy for me to say, oh, they got to be related, but I could be wrong. I think there's a relationship, but to go further than that and say what that relationship is, I haven't a clue, brother. I wouldn't even know where to start. So again, that's why I don't say high strangeness because, um, you know, I don't know what's considered high strangeness. I don't think remote viewing is high strangeness. I think it's just science, and I think soon we're going to learn more about how it works, and people will just be like, "Oh, okay, got it," and it won't have that weird stigma associated with it.
I've got a question here from an anonymous source saying, "Other than in a hangar, has Lou ever seen a flying disc in person?"
I'll just say yes for now. I've got. I again, let me and just reemphasize. I know this drives people nuts, but I got to do it. I am allowed to talk about whatever's in my book. Anything beyond that, I don't have approval to do that, and I've got to be really careful because now more than ever, I've got some serious haters. I've got some people who really, really want me to shut up and go away, and they're looking for an excuse for me to step over my bounds. And so I'm being extremely cautious in how I answer certain questions. And not that the questions themselves are sensitive, but they could lead very quickly to a very sensitive conversation.
The next question is from Amy Lou on YouTube, and she says, "Is the military really trying to shoot them down? If so, do they not worry that they, at one point, might retaliate?"
Well, I don't think we're trying to engage them and shoot them down like it was reported back in the 1950s, potentially during I believe it was 1953, maybe 52, with the Washington, D.C. Event that occurred over the Capitol building. There was a report that we did try to shoot it down, and that we maybe even succeeded in hitting it. I don't know. I wasn't alive back then. I just hearing the anecdotes. Furthermore, we do know that pilots that I've spoken to in South America and even the Iranian pilot in Tehran all tried to engage the targets. In some cases, their aircraft were disabled, their avionics were disabled, only to be recovered once they stopped engaging. In other cases, pilots used their 20 millimeter cannon, onboard cannon, and failed to hit the target. Um, my recommendation has always been not to shoot it down. I don't even know if conventional weapons could shoot one down. We do know there's a potential vulnerability to EMP. So you could potentially shoot one down without ever firing a shot if you know what you're doing and if you really want to. I've always recommended against being provocative. That's why in the Project Interloper that we had sent up through the Joint Staff, it was very clear it was going to be all passive, meaning we were going to put out a big nuclear footprint out in the middle of the ocean. UAPs were going to show up, and then we had sensor data systems there to collect information, but we weren't going to do anything provocative. We weren't going to actively try to disable one. We just wanted to look at its telemetry, where it's coming out of, where it's coming into, is it coming in from space, underwater, and try to collect as much signature data as possible. That was the intent of Interloper, and we all agreed at no time were we going to be provocative, because you never know. You don't want to go kick a hornet's nest if you don't know what you're doing. So I'll leave it at that.
Sabrina on Instagram asks, in Lou's opinion, what are the potential implications for global security and geopolitics? Sabrina asks, in Lou's opinion, what are the potential implications for global security and geopolitics if it were confirmed that some UAPs are of extraterrestrial origin?
Wow. Well, this is the big question, isn't it? It's not what are they going to do; it's what we're going to do, and that's for me the biggest concern. I'm less concerned about UAP than I am about our reaction to UAP. And this is why this conversation needs to be a global conversation. This is why, from a national security perspective, I'm okay with our government being part of that conversation. But this conversation is much bigger than that. This is a conversation that is philosophical, psychological, sociological, theological, right? That involves all of us. And I don't want my government telling me what to think about this. I just want to know, is it a threat or not? And if it's not, then get out of my business. And I think we need to have a bigger conversation. I think this is a conversation where you want to sit with your priest or your rabbi or your imam, or maybe around the dinner table with your family and friends, or I don't know, but forever, whatever you do, don't let some government bureaucrat make that decision for you, because they're not qualified. They've proven that over and over again, and that's why I don't tell people either what to think about it, because I'm not qualified. I'm the first one to tell you, look, I'm not that guy. I'm not a philosopher or PhD person that can talk to you about the history of theology, and I have no idea. I'm a national security guy myself, but I recognize that, and that's why I'm trying to shift this conversation to the bigger audience, the global audience on the global stage, so we can get the best and brightest to have the conversation. Uh, because so far, keeping it in national security channels hasn't really worked very well, has it? So
Now, I've got another question here that says, were there attempts to communicate with UAP, like with radio, using light signals or sound? And were there any responses from that?
yes, there were. So there was some work done in the early days. It's proprietary, so I can't give a lot of details, but we actually had several proposals to have a suite of instrumentation that was speculated to not only attract, but once they came, think of a mini interloper. We could do some little things somewhere, and then when they showed up, we'd have collection capabilities to start analyzing and recording performance characteristics and whatnot. It turns out that there was a good deal of promise that you might be able to use certain frequencies of light, believe it or not, to potentially lure or attract these things. Think of bioluminescence underwater, right? We can get down and we can put an LED, multicolored LED in the bottom of the ocean, and what shows up? The Humboldt squid, right? Because it's hungry. It sees some lights, and ooh, what's that? Let me go see. I wonder if it's juicy. Um, so yeah, there's also some study to suggest there may be some infrasonics that could be helpful in trying to triangulate UAP as well. Uh, so yeah, I won't go too much more than that. But yeah, there seems to be maybe some things you can do to when you go fishing. It depends. Not all lures work, right? Some lures are some lures man, this is crap. I'm not catching nothing. So
Well, we are actually closing in on the hour. I know our time is restricted, but let me ask you, what are your thoughts on actually writing a second book?
well, there's a whole lot to discuss. If I write a second book, the question is, do I continue on the UAP topic and talk about all the things I didn't put in the book and continue on with another one? Or do I talk about the other things that I've been involved with in the government that may have some historical value? Not that I did anything historical, but those portfolios have some very interesting historical value that may, you know, shed some insight on government transparency. Look, I am a believer and an advocate of government transparency and advocacy, and unfortunately, we've done a lot of things that have led to the mistrust of the American people in our institution, and that's problematic because this institution only works because people have faith and confidence in our government. And when they don't, then things start to happen bad. And so um, we have to keep those individuals accountable. And I'm the first one to stand up and say, I'll hold myself accountable before anybody else. and I'll accept full responsibility. If anything I did that was wrong or bad, then I'll accept responsibility. Um, we need that in government because that's why government works. And anybody who's in government who forgets that they're there to serve the interests of the American people, or their loyalty to the American people, or to government for the people by the people, then you need to get out of your job. You you're not the right job because you are a servant. When you're in government, you are a servant of the people. Full stop. And government is there to serve the people, not the other way around. And people in government forget that. And when they do, they need to leave. They need to get out. And that's if I were to write another book, there's a whole lot I could write about. I could write about intelligence. How does intelligence really work? Everybody's, oh, disinformation agent. Oh, he's counterintelligence. Do you even know what counterintelligence means? I mean, most people, they say, oh, you're a counterintelligence agent. Yeah, duh. Do you know what it means? By the way, it's not psyops. Two different disciplines. I know it's easy to say, oh, counterintelligence. That's like saying, oh, yeah, well, if you're a drag race car driver, then therefore you must be excellent on a BMX bike. What? Different things. What are you talking about? I can't even ride a bike. So I'm kidding, of course. But my point being is that I could spend an entire book talking just about the nuances of intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, imagery intelligence, counterintelligence. And where is it used in the business world, and where is it used in politics, and where is it used for national security? And people do it all the time. People use intelligence all the time and don't even realize they're doing it. Um, so I don't know. Maybe I figure people are probably tired of hearing me talk anyway. So if I write another book, I doubt anybody's going to want to read it. But I'm happy to do that. There's all sorts of options. I guess maybe what I would do is ask you all: do you want another book? And if so, what do you want it about? Because I'm happy to tell you anything that I can tell you legally. I'm happy to do that. And not, by the way, not all those very pretty, right? There's a lot of things that happen in the government and in conflict that you know kind of are ugly, but that's the reality, right? And so that's what you have to do. That's why for me in this last book I wrote, in the book Imminent, you know, I shared some of myself, and the reason is because I cannot look at you, in good faith and stand up on a hill and scream, "I want transparency" by the government when I'm not willing to be transparent myself. And so transparency starts with me, starts with you, starts with all of us. And if you're not willing to be transparent yourself, then you can't really expect anybody else to be. So that's why I put a lot of myself into the book, knowing that there would be criticism, knowing that people would rip me apart for certain things, but there's no way around it. Either you're true to yourself and your mission, or you're not. And so I put some very personal things in that book for that exact reason, for better or for worse.
So, since the release of the book, have you been contacted by anyone, within the government, or even from somebody overseas in a high-ranking position to say, thank you for writing the book?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to protect their identities. Um, I explain to them after they go through the usual, "Oh, you're a hero," and I have to tell them, "No, I'm not." In fact, every time someone says that, I suffer from imposter syndrome. I really do, because I've served with real heroes, and some of those folks never made it back from the battlefield, right? So to put me in that category it's just, I mean, thanks for the compliment, but I know in my heart I don't deserve that, right? And so I'm just doing what anybody else would do in my position. I took an oath to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. It turned out that the bureaucracy was part of that problem for a while. We're trying to fix it. I think we are fixing it, but I'm not a hero. I'm not anything anybody else. Anybody listening to in your audience right now, listening to this, if they're in my position, they would have done the same thing. And frankly, one would argue maybe even done a better job than me. I don't know. I didn't have a roadmap, so just following my heart and using my brain. Um, but I guess that would be up to the people to decide if what the next step is. I've had people come up and thank me. Yes, I have, and it's been very heartfelt, and I appreciate it very much. But again, sometimes people give you accolades that you don't deserve, and so I'm very quick to address it immediately, because I'm I'm just an average dude like everybody else.
So my final question, Lou, is there a roadmap for disclosure? Whether we get the UAPDA passed this year or not, is there a solid sort of direction that we're definitely going in when it comes to actually getting confirmation or full transparency?
We've always had a roadmap, baby. Come on. I told everybody, man, I made it clear years ago. We had five pillars, right, of emphasis. We had the legislative engagement, the executive engagement, international engagement, media engagement, and public engagement. That's always been the roadmap, and shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. I made it perfectly clear, and this is we you we are not hiding anything. We're not pulling any punches. People can see exactly what our roadmap is, and you can either be part of that roadmap or not. It's up to you. Um, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's kind of common sense, really. Yeah, we're not giving up. We're not stopping. This is we're moving forward. Now you're seeing me go enter a new phase where I can really start that public engagement. For a while, I've been working behind the scenes, really focusing on the executive and legislative engagement. Now I'm focusing on media public engagement for the next foreseeable future because I need to bolster those up. Right, it's like putting up a roof. All those columns have to rise at the same rate, otherwise you have a lopsided roof. So now that we've got legislation and the executive branch finally have an arrow, an organization, and new leadership, and we've got new legislation coming, old legislation been passed. Now I need to focus on what's probably arguably the most important pillar or column, which is public engagement, and get the public involved. Right, this is not a world according to Lou. I made it very clear as I start going around and talking to people, I want their views. What does disclosure look like to you? How do we get there? Right, I don't want to be the one unilaterally making the decision. Now that we're here, it's been 7 years, and I think we've come a long way. But where do we go from here? Right, and how do we do it? And what does that look like? And what role does each and every individual play? Every member of your audience has a role to play. They're just as important to disclosure as you are or I am. So, what role is that, and how do they do it? And so, this is the next phase of the disclosure conversation I'd like to have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm just honored to be a part of this process, and I get to speak with people such as yourself and, form friendships with such individuals. So I'm just honored to be a part of this and really appreciate everything that you've done. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, sir. We will, and share have a pint at the pub, and please, if anybody in your audience ever, when I'm over across the pond anytime, uh, love to do a get together. Not a problem. We'll have our Sacred Order of the Red Lion.
Absolutely.
Maybe expand that a little bit, right? Boy, there's going to be all sorts. I just said that there's going to be so much conspiracy around that. What did he say? What is this Sacred Order of the Red Lion? Well, it is a secret.
Let them have their fun, Lou. Let them have their fun. That's what they like to do. So, but yeah, I just want to say finally, thank you so much, Lou. Always good talking to you, and to everybody watching. As always, thank you so much for the ongoing support. Really means a lot, and I hope you enjoyed this interview. And all that's left to say is we'll see you on the next one. So for now, take care and goodbye.